listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
What is up? Thank you so much for choosing to listen to my show, Straight to Video. It's massively appreciated, and I hope you enjoyed today's talk with a real rock and roll journeyman who has played with countless music icons, but is also an incredibly accomplished singer-songwriter himself. On today's show, I'm chatting with guitarist Steve Conte, known for working with the New York Dolls and Michael Monroe, but scratch the surface just the tiniest bit, and there is so much more to unpack from Steve's amazing career. After studying jazz at university, he will be able to use that musical knowledge on his own hard rock journey through New York City. From forming a legendary blues night which would see guests such as Cyndi Lauper, Etta James and Steve Clark of Def Leppard all wanting to be a part of it, to later forming his own rock band Company of Wolves. Later he would work with Paul Simon and Billy Squier, to just seriously name just a few. Then in 2004, Steve would be invited to join the reunited New York Dolls, and then a few years later join up with Hanoi Rock's frontman and glam rock pioneer Michael Monroe, who he continues to work with to this day, and is from Finland, where we caught up with Steve as he works on the new Monroe album. Steve, though, was excited to talk about his new and frankly brilliant solo record, Bronx Cheer, which has just been released on Little Stevie Van Zant's label Wicked Cool Records, and it's a great mixed collection of low-slung rock and roll tunes with some huge hooks and just great songwriting throughout, which makes it easy to see why Little Steven wanted this on his underground label. Before we dive into this fun chat, please show some love and support to our pals Dead Skull Coffee and grab yourself 15% off any order over at deadskullcoffee.co.uk. I know they really appreciate the custom from people like yourself, and it's great to have them support this show. And if you could, please check out the Straight to Video Patreon, where I post a bonus podcast, give you an early heads up on guests, along with access to exclusive merch you won't find anywhere else. It's a lot of fun and really goes a long way to growing this show, so please visit patreon.com/STVpod for all the info. Alright, Steve was a lot of fun, and I would have loved to have gone even deeper into his story, but that would have been one heck of a long podcast. But I think we got some fun stuff in here. If you want to learn more, then it can all be found at stevecontenyc.com, where there's a ton of great stuff to dive into, and the new album Bronx Cheer is out now through Wicked Cool Records. But in the meantime, though, please enjoy my straight-to-video chat with the legendary Steve Conte. The cover of the new album, it looks like a photo you found in some boxes of photos from decades ago, but it's a fairly recent one.
Yeah, it's only from 2016. It's a kid protesting the election of Donald Trump. There was a whole protest, I guess the day after he got elected, on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, and all these like high school kids who were 16 at the time were like, you know, we're better than this. How can we elect this guy?
Was you as passionate about stuff like that when you was that guy's age?
When I was 16, you know what? I was not into politics at all. These days, I'm very into it because I'm thinking about like what kind of place we're leaving for our kids, you know? And I'm seeing the repercussions of back when you're 16. When I was 16, back in the day, all I cared about was girls and rock and roll and whatever substances I was involved with, you know, and partying. And
It's quite exciting, though, that kids are that passionate about it these days, in a way. It's quite a positive thing.
yeah, I mean, there may have been kids that were like that back then. I didn't know any of them. I wasn't friends with, all my friends were, we were the kind that would, be doing bong hits in the car at 10 minutes to 8 and then going in and trying to learn math at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Awesome. I've enjoyed unpacking your story. There's quite a lot in there, so I don't want to keep you for hours and hours and hours, or we could be a long time.
It's okay. Ask me some different shit because, I've done so many of these and, I'm always like reposting my interviews, but I'm like, oh God, do people really want to hear again about growing up with my jazz singing mother? I mean, it's a great story, but.
Well, we'll give people a little bit of an indication on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, I'm proud of that. And that's part of what makes me what I am.
Yeah, we'll try and go off on a left field at some point. Feel free to go wherever you want.
Yeah, I'll try and divert.
Because you grew up in New York, upstate New York, in kind of the Buffalo area, and you obviously had a younger brother, John, who's played a massive part in your musical journey, right up to and including the new album Bronx Cheer. What were the two of you into before music came along, or was it always music as far back as you can remember?
No, first it was Batman.
Yes.
It was Batman and Mission Impossible, which were on TV at the time, and football. We lived in Buffalo, so we were crazy about the Buffalo Bills, the American football team. And this is when O.J. Simpson was just signed. He just came out of University USC. So, before any of the scandal, any of that stuff.
He was a massive star.
Yeah, I mean, we were little kids and we were all about football. We had football uniforms. We had, shoulder pads. We had the helmets. We had the pants. We had everything. And then we heard the Beatles, and that was it.
Was that just on the radio?
You know what? I can't remember hearing the Beatles on the radio before I listened to the album Revolver. It was the album Revolver that did it for me. I was 6 when I heard that.
Did you know of the name The Beatles before then? Was it on your radar?
Yeah, we knew the name, but I mean, maybe, my mom tells me I was sitting on her lap watching them on Ed Sullivan, but I don't remember because I was like 4.
But you'll take it. You saw him on Ed Sullivan.
Yeah, I saw him on Ed Sullivan, I guess. But when we heard Revolver, it was like, wow, because we were listening with headphones and, you heard all the stuff flying around in the stereo field, like crazy sound effects and tape loops. And, nobody was doing that then. It was like what you heard on the radio was, pretty clean sounding, pop music.
Was you listening to much music prior to that point? Because obviously, like you say, your mum, she was a jazz singer, so music was constantly surrounding you. But did you have your own music prior to the Beatles?
Not really. Around the same time, I liked a group called the Buckinghams, which were kind of an American, more pop Beatles with horns. That may have been actually after. I don't really remember the timeline. I just remember Revolver had that impact. But if I think about this other stuff besides that I knew, a lot of stuff that came a few years later, like the Hollies and Small Faces, Sly and the Family Stone, the Stones. Well, actually, the Beatles and the Stones, I got both of their records at the same time for my 9th birthday.
Did you and your brother kind of say, you get this album for your birthday and I'll get this one?
No, it was kind of, but we did that with singles, like, 45, the 7-inch singles were the rage. And I remember we used to, we would get like, it's in the days where the milkman would come to your house, and like drop off bottles of milk. If you saved enough tops from the milk bottles, you could bring those to the record store and you gave whatever 10 milk tops and they give you 45.
What? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, well, that was how it was in Buffalo. So we got like, Hello Goodbye and Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields and, a bunch of 45s. But I think all that was after Revolver. Like I said, the timeline is a little bit blurry. But, I think like my music listening, from 0 to pre-Revolver, it was like whatever I heard around my house. My mom and dad had a great jazz collection. So I heard, Sinatra and Tony Bennett.
That was all sinking into your DNA.
Yeah. And real jazz, like instrumental stuff like Cannonball Adderley, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Wes Montgomery, and then the singers like Ella Fitzgerald.
Did you ever bring that up with like your friend group and you'd mention all these people and they're like, what the hell are you talking about?
No, because we weren't talking about music back then with kids. I mean, music was like, the Monkees were on TV. It was a TV show, we weren't having a band yet. We didn't start a band until really, I was a drummer first. I wanted to be Ringo. So when I was 7, after I heard Revolver, I was, I wanted to be Ringo. I was taking drum lessons. It wasn't until 3 or 4 years later when we moved from upstate New York to right outside of New York City in New Jersey, and I picked up my brother's guitar and started writing songs. Then we said, oh, we should have a band, And I thought, I can't get stuck behind the drums if I'm going to write songs and sing and play guitar. I got to be up front, So
did it just make sense to you immediately? I've got a guitar, I need to write the songs rather than I've got to learn songs.
I didn't know what I was doing. My brother had already been taking guitar lessons. So I picked up his guitar one day and just started banging on it. And I made up a song instantly. I didn't know what I was doing. I played, one string, I just like made up sort of the bass line of the song. And, between the melody, what I was singing, and the bass notes I was playing, it was like, that's a song, Then we decided we should have a group and we should make an album. And we recorded an album in the living room on cassette tape.
How old was you then?
I was 11. My brother was 10. And, we had to like position ourselves around it. We had a little cassette recorder. We had to position ourselves in such a way that, the drums were way at the back of the room. They were the loudest. And whoever was singing and playing guitar was like right up on the mic like this. And it's amazingly balanced. I still have the tapes.
I was just about to say, does it still survive, the tape?
Oh, yeah. In fact, one of the songs showed up on, we had a band called the Crown Jewels, me and my brother. And on our album Linoleum, the song Peace made an appearance on that record. It's only a 30-second long song, so you can kind of take the crudeness of the recording for 30 seconds. I mean, there are some songs on there that are like 5 minutes long, and it's like torturous, unless you're the one listening to, oh, wasn't I cute back then,
Tell me you did some artwork for it.
Oh, yeah. I would draw the album covers, I'd draw, I was obsessed with drawing, bands with guitars and drums, and I still have all the artwork. I saved everything.
New York has become a major part of your life one way or another. Do you remember the first time in New York City as a young boy and what your impression of it was? Was it once you'd moved to Jersey, you got the chance to go into Manhattan?
Yeah, Buffalo is 8 hours from New York City, so we never went to New York City. But when we moved to New Jersey, it was 50 minutes. We could get on the train and be in Manhattan in under an hour. And so, that's where we, when we were a little bit older, in our teens, we would take the train to Madison Square Garden and we'd see The Who and Zeppelin. And
well, just to rewind a little bit, wasn't Chuck Berry at Madison Square Garden your first gig?
That was my first show I ever saw when I was 13. Yeah, that was, they had like a 50s revival. It was like the Shirelles and I don't remember all the bands, but I mean, I went for Chuck. Chuck was my man. My dad took me to see Chuck, and I'll never forget, afterwards, we're waiting outside the stage door for him. I haven't told this story. We're waiting outside the stage door, and here comes Chuck. And it comes out, he's just wearing a suit jacket, got his guitar in one hand. And my dad's like, come on, Chuck, how about an autograph for the kid? And Chuck's like, no autographs, no autographs. And I'm like walking right beside Chuck Berry, and I stick my hand in his suit jacket pocket. He didn't catch me either, He could have kicked my ass, but I'm thinking maybe I'll find a guitar pick, a matchbook, anything that's Chuck Berry's, empty. Pockets were empty.
All the money was in his guitar case.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he just kept on walking. Yeah, that was it. I met Chuck, and then, yeah, you know the story. Years later, I played with him.
What do you think that young kid would have said if someone had told him that Steve Conte would play alongside Chuck Berry in the future?
Like many things that have come to pass, I would have said, get out of here. That's too good to be true, But years later, when I first moved to New York, I played Madison Square Garden within my first year of living there. I did my first record within like a month of living there. I played with Chuck a year or two later, a couple of years after that, I was signed to Mercury Records with my own band, and, on and on, stuff like that just kept happening. So
you see, you started off at a big level. You see, at your first gig, you met the guy who you went to see. Anything was possible after that point.
That is true. Yeah, I wouldn't go to another show. Like, I wouldn't go to a real rock show on my own for another, I don't know, maybe 3 years. And I had to lie to my mom and sneak out of the house. I had to sneak to the show. I told her, Mom, I'm going to see James Taylor play at the Garden State Arts Center. He was a really nice folk singer. It's going to be really soft, mellow music. We're going to be sitting on the lawn. It's going to be nice, a beautiful evening. And what do? We went down to the casino arena in Asbury Park and saw Sabbath and did all kinds of illegal substances. And
who was that? You and your brother, or you and a bunch of mates?
No, it was me and a couple of older friends. I ended up hanging out with guys that were older than me all the time. So they had cars and they had, licenses and they had ID to get beer.
I'm hanging with these guys. This is the way forward.
Exactly. Yeah, that's at the point where me and my brother went like, because my brother was still hanging with his 13-year-old friends and I was 15 and I was like hanging with 17, 18-year-old dudes who had cars. And
probably terrified him. I ain't going nowhere near them. Did New York have an allure and an attraction for you in the 70s? Was it somewhere you could see yourself moving to at some point?
Yeah, well, I knew that, where I was in New Jersey, there was nothing happening. I mean, this was before Bon Jovi or Skid Row or any of those bands, had come around because we're about the same age. But back then, the only thing in New Jersey was Springsteen. I mean, now I totally, I think the guy's a genius, and think the world of his songwriting. But back then I was into like big shows and glam and, Kiss and Aerosmith and Zeppelin and big loud stuff. I didn't, guy with an acoustic guitar and harmonica. I mean, I grew up with Dylan, I love Dylan. But by the time I was 15, 16, I wanted to crank up my Les Paul, wear makeup and steal my mother's clothes and wear high heels and,
Who were some of your bands? And I guess, being like New York kind of area, was Kiss a big band for you? When was the first time you got to see them live?
I saw them on the Destroyer tour. That was my first Kiss show. So I don't know what that would have been, 76 maybe?
Yeah. Who was your guy?
I liked Kiss because my first girlfriend, who wasn't my girlfriend yet, she was this girl that I was after. And I thought, she likes Kiss. I should get into them. So a friend of mine he had like an 8-track player and he brought over Hotter Than Hell or something. And I was like, I didn't really love the sound of it, but I was like, well, this is what Cindy likes. So maybe I should check it out, and sure enough, it got me in, you know what I'm saying?
What happened to Cindy?
Actually, we're friends on Facebook. I haven't seen her in decades, but like everyone, most people I was friends with or hung out with or went out with still around.
When was the point where you saw music as a career opportunity? Was it made easier to choose that path because your mum had done it as a singer? She'd made like a career with it as well. So it wasn't fantasy like it is to a lot of people. You'd seen the reality of it. Was there a point where you're like, yeah, I want to give this a shot? Yeah,
the thing is, my mom had made a record when she was 18 and it was a local label, upstate New York, where she was from. We were from Utica, like that whole area called the Mohawk Valley. Like all these little towns around Utica, Herkimer, Frankfurt, Ilion, all these little towns you never heard of. But she made a little record up there. And then she got pregnant with me. And so she kind of had to leave the music career behind at 19 years old when she had me. And then when we moved to New Jersey, my parents split up and that was the only thing she knew how to do. She had to go back to singing, but it wasn't like as a career. She wasn't like trying to be Rosemary Conte, the artist. It was just like pay the bills, I mean, she had quite a career as a jazz singer. She got to play with lots of well-respected, international jazz stars that were called New Jersey their home. But a lot of times it was playing the lounge at the Holiday Inn, and playing Joni Mitchell or Casey and the Sunshine Band. I don't know, whatever was on the radio, So I saw it as a possibility that you could make a living with music. But, my dreams were always to write my own stuff, which was very different from what my mom did. She's written a couple of really nice songs, but, her thing has never been, an artist, songwriter, more been an interpreter of standards and, especially like the Billie Holiday kind of stuff, which is where her strength really is, at that kind of swing.
How did she feel about the big guitars that her son was listening to compared to the jazz records that she'd been trying to play to him all the time?
She used to come and clean my room and she would write in the dust on my dresser. She'd write jazz. Right, in the dust.
Just a reminder.
and then I'd erase it, and I'd write in the other part of the dust, I'd write rock. So we had this little thing going on back and forth. And, for a while, like my first gigs that I ever did were playing with her, but it was like folk music. They would have, in the 70s, they were just starting to open up their minds a little bit in the church. And we used to go to church all the time because we had no money. Basically, the church community really helped us out. I mean, otherwise, my dad kind of left us in a bad way, and we had to do like the welfare thing and the free lunch and, all that kind of stuff. And the church community really helped us out. They gave us clothes, they gave us a car, they bring food to our house because we had nothing. And we would start playing these weddings. People would hire us for their weddings because they were moving away from the traditional organ choir in the church, and they were having like folk groups. So all of a sudden, like on the altar, at a church was like, my mom and these adults from the community were playing folk guitars and like doing, Peter, Paul and Mary and Dylan and Cat Stevens, whatever. So some of my first gigs were like playing wedding ceremonies with my mom where we were doing like folk songs. And that worked out for a while, but we didn't really know enough about the kind of music that she played. So she gave us like on the job training. We had to learn all these jazz standards, and we had to learn them in different keys. The female singing was different than a male key. And, so we really got our musical chops together working with her.
With you saying that, do you think that helped later on? Because I think you said when you started working with Paul Simon, like some of the arrangements of that was like really tricky. Do you think that kind of helped you? Or?
Absolutely. I mean, everything helped, you can get by playing punk rock if you don't know what you're doing. You can play 3-4 chords, not know what they're called, write some catchy songs and play okay bar chords and pentatonic scales and have a whole career, be a millionaire, But I didn't go that route. I actually had the opportunity to have a scholarship to go to school. And I just always had a thirst for knowledge, like some people want to say, oh, you cheated. You got good because you took lessons. You went to school, whatever. I had a thirst for knowledge, so sue me. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, if you go to art school or you go to school for writing or marketing or something else, but if you go to school for music, oh, God forbid, But I had a thirst for knowledge, so I went. And then I got to go for free. I didn't, I was no rich kid. I didn't pay for it. I didn't take out a student loan. They actually fucking paid me to go to school. Oh, yeah. I took the money that I got from the government from being in our poor situation. I bought a car. I bought a Mesa Boogie amp. Then I went off to college,
Where was your head, though? Was you torn between, like, the rock route? Should I go down the more, let's say, anarchic route of rock and roll? Or was you torn between that kind of choice?
By the time that I was 19 and I was getting ready to go to college, I was already a really good rock guitar player. Jersey was full of cover bands, bar bands. And you'd go and you'd see these bands and they'd play all the shit that was on the radio. I mean, there'd be specialty bands that were like tributes, like the Rush tribute band or the Zeppelin tribute band or whatever. But most bar bands they played all the music that was on the radio. They'd play, Zeppelin, then they'd play Toto, then they'd play Santana, then, there was no bag of music. It's like all over the place. And I never did that. I wrote my songs, played local like battle of the bands and high school dances and stuff. And then before I could, get stuck in a bar band like that, I went to school and I learned about jazz, But I was already a really pretty well-rounded rock and roll player by that point.
You were just expanding on your knowledge.
Yeah, I knew all the chords, all the scales and everything already anyway. But, some of the guys that were in my class were, they decided to come to college to learn jazz guitar, but they hadn't really played enough guitar. I could already play guitar. So I never had to like choose. I never felt like I had, although I did get snobby, like for a few years there, I didn't listen to any rock. I listened to like 4 rock bands: The Police, The Pretenders, XTC, and that might have been it. Yeah, maybe some prog or something like Gentle Giant or Yes or something. Because I found those bands to be very musical, and I was really into like things that were musical. And punk was coming out at the time, and like I didn't think much of the Sex Pistols back then, or I liked what I heard by the Clash. But of course, I've come appreciate all that stuff now. But I'm glad I had those blinders on for those few years, because it really, being a jazz snob for a couple of years there just made me, if I had dabbled in jazz and like went out and played rock all the time, I would have never gotten facility to be able to do. And I'm not by any stretch of imagination, a great jazz musician now. But, I know the vocabulary. I can hang on my own with just about any musical situation, really.
Did you meet somebody called Jiggs who had an important influence on future projects?
Yeah.
Was it his brother-in-law, Glenn Burtnick? You made your first MTV video with him.
Yes, Jiggs was we dated these two girls that were best friends. That's how I met him. He had a punk band called Jigs and the Pigs. I was all into my arty, I was in a band called Venus Envy, and we did like harmonic, there was this guy, James Blood Ulmer and Jamaluddin Tacoma, which were like sort of avant-garde funk jazz musicians kind of coming out of like the Ornette Coleman sort of school. I was playing that kind of music, and I didn't really take Jigs and the Pigs very seriously, but I loved the guy. And he eventually turned me on to, he said, hey, you should meet my brother-in-law, Glenn Burtnick. And we met. And then, I did my first MTV video with him. And
so going down the jazz route ultimately brought you back onto the rock path anyway.
Yeah, I just kind of took a little detour and came back. And besides those couple of years where I was a bit of a jazz snob, I had never felt like after that, like, I'm above anyone because I learned all this stuff. But I think some people, they maybe feel like a little threatened. So then they have to sort of put you down a little bit and be, oh, yeah, well, of course he's good. He learned, at school, I've actually heard people say that. That's why I say it. Of course he's good. He went to music school. Like, I was good before I went to music school, okay? I just learned a little bit more.
That video and song Follow You for Glenn Burtnick, that's great. How was that making that?
Yeah, that was an experience. That was my first MTV video and first time, wardrobe, girls and makeup and hair and makeup. So it was kind of exciting. I didn't play on the album, but I was in his touring band for a bit. And then that was a whirlwind of gigs that year. It was like I had just gotten done with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Talk about a band that you need some training for. I didn't even audition for them. I didn't have any rehearsals with them. It was like they're a famous jazz rock horn band, and well, I never aspired to be in a band like that, but I got the call for the gig. My brother was playing with them, and they said, "Hey, we need a guitar player. Can you come and do this gig?" I'm like, "Got any, sheet music or anything?" They're like, "No, here's a cassette tape. Learn it on the plane on your way down to the gig." So that's what I did. I had a little Walkman, and made out my own charts on the plane. Showed up in Miami and played the first gig with them, and stayed with the band for 2 years.
Must have gone all right then, that first gig.
Yeah, but because of my ear training and all that, and I could figure all that shit out without even my guitar in my hand. So yeah, the musical training came in handy. I mean, when it comes down to playing rock, you just gotta kind of throw that stuff away. Although I do, I try and be as musical as possible in any situation. Like here we are recording with Monroe, and it's basically 2-3 chord songs, but I try and play something musically interesting. I don't play jazz on it.
What colors can I put on top of this?
Yeah, nothing too fancy, but just some little thing here or there that maybe your average punk rock guy wouldn't do. You know what I mean? And I think that's what gives stuff a little bit of personality. I mean, Andy Summers and the Police, he did that.
Did you ever see the Police live?
I did, but way after their initial success. I didn't see them until 84 when they were about to break up. I saw them because Sting had already come out with his solo album, and he had Branford Marsalis join them on sax on a song. I was like, oh, no, come on. I wanted to see Message in a Bottle and all those great songs played as a trio, but they were already expanding and, saxophones and backup girls and all that.
You eventually moved into New York in the 80s. Where did you first move to? Do you remember how it was like? I've made it into New York. Was it a bit intimidating or was you ready for it?
I had started playing gigs with my band around the city in 84 when I was still living in New Jersey. And around 85, I was going to a place called the Cat Club, which was a legendary kind of sleaze rock bar on the East Village. I met this girl and we ended up hitting it off and dating for a couple of years. So I would pretty much live with her. I'd stay with her. I was living about 15 minutes outside of the city in near Jersey City, but I would stay with her all the time. So I got to know the city. She had lived there for years. So she kind of showed me around. I got to know all the places, the scrap bar, all the little sleazy dive bars and rock and roll bars. So by the time I moved in 86, I moved to the complete, non-rock and roll area called the Upper East Side. But, it was the cheap apartment that I found. I looked at places down in the cool part, in the East Village, but 6th floor walk-ups and then a drug dealer building and way too much money. And, I got a cheap apartment on the Upper East Side in the non-hip area. So I took it and I stayed there for 30 years.
Wow, man, wow. You would become, I think this is cool, you would become part of, hopefully I get this right, you become part of the Hudson River Rats in 1988 and had a residency at, is it the Under Acme Blues Night? What can you tell us about that?
That was in the West Village. Yeah, like if you head downtown, when you get below, like I lived on 86th Street, and if you go all the way down to like below 14th Street, then you're in the Village. And depending on which side of town you're on, you're in the East Village or the West Village. The West Village was sort of a bit nicer and maybe more preppy and less rock and roll. The Lower East Side was more junkies and punk rockers and the hardcore like artists and stuff. So the Under Acme was like, it was kind of on the border. It was like around the corner from CBGB's, but, in the sort of nicer area. And the Hudson River Rats was my blues band. I had started it, me and my brother and harmonica player named Rob Paparosi. It was actually the rhythm section from Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And we played at this Under Acme club for, it was like 2 years, every Wednesday night. And people heard about it. And the news came and they did stories on us. And like Cyndi Lauper would come down and jam with us, Carole King, Julian Lennon.
Didn't Steve Clark come one time?
Steve Clark came, yes. That's when we moved it uptown. We moved it to the Lone Star Roadhouse after a while. Then it sort of fell apart. By the time we did that, my brother and I had already been signed to Mercury Records and we were kind of on our way out.
Did you ever get like a heads up as to who was coming, or was it just be people who was in town and they'd say, can I come up?
Yeah, sometimes we would do sound checks. We would always do sound check rehearsals, especially if we knew who was coming. Phoebe Snow was a great singer. She's passed away. She was my vocal mentor, amazing singer. She would always come and we'd run through stuff with her. We probably ran through stuff with Cyndi and Carol, and Willie DeVille came down, and David Johansen when he was Buster, and a bunch of the guys from like the Blues Brothers and the Letterman Band. So I got to know a lot of studio people too, and parlayed that into a little bit of a studio musical career for a while. But it was a really good, it's great to have a residency where you live, where people can come see you all the time. And then, you get lots of work out of it. So people come and see you and they hear about you and they hear your name and they pass your name around. And that's
one thing leads to another. And was it through there you'd meet Keith Brewer, which led to the formation of Company of Wolves in 88?
That's exactly what happened. The whole blues night was not our idea. We had the band, but going back to Jiggs introduced me to Glenn, who introduced me to this drummer, Jimmy Clark, who incidentally played with Michael and Sammy in Demolition 23 later. Then this guy, Jimmy Clark, this drummer, he dragged me into a project with his girlfriend, who was being produced by this guy, Jeff Kent. And I was talking to Jeff, and Jeff was a keyboard player and a producer, and he was like, I want to do a blues night. I said, well, I just happen to have a blues band. So Jeff said, hey, man, I got this guy you should meet. I've been working with him a little bit, and I've been writing songs with him. His name is Keith Brewer, and you guys have really hit it off. He loves all the stuff that you love. He loves the Beatles and Stones and a bit more on the Americana, like Tom Petty kind of sound. He came down and like jammed with us at the club, and I thought he was a good singer, and he came to my house, and the first day we wrote the song The Distance. That was our second single. A week later, we had written 3 more, and then a month later, we're like, hey, man, we got 6 songs. We should start a band. And I said, I know a bass player, my brother. He said, I know a drummer, Frankie LaRocca, who had played with Bryan Adams and John Waite and was also an A&R guy for Atlantic Records at the time. So actually helped us out, got us some demo money from Atlantic Records. We recorded some demos for Atlantic, and then ultimately Atlantic didn't want to sign us. So we took the demos. We said, great, we'll go elsewhere. So we went to a bunch of other record companies, and 4 other record companies were bidding for us. It was during that time when there'd be bidding wars with bands, like
someone hears that this band's the next big thing, so we need a piece of that.
Yeah, they probably do that. They probably do that now over like hip hop or kiddie pop, whatever bands. But back then it was rock and roll bands, because everybody wanted a big rock band with big hair and loud guitars, and
You'd released your debut album in 1990. Whose idea was it to recreate the American Werewolf in London scene in the Call of the Wild video?
I think we had recorded all the demos for the album, and at the last minute I said, we need a song called Call of the Wilds. We're Company of Wolves. came up with that chorus. My brother had the riff. We did the demo of the song. It was like, great. All right, that's going on the album. And I don't remember. I think the guy who did the video, this guy Ralph Zeman, who had done. Do you remember what was the band? You want it all, but you can't.
Faith No More.
Faith No More. Remember the video with the fish, where the fish is flopping at the end? This guy, Ralph Zeman, had done that video. And we hired him to do our video. And I believe that was his idea.
Where was it shot?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. It was like, it's going to be cheaper to fly you guys to Scotland to film this at Doune Castle, where Monty Python, the Holy Grail, had been filmed. And we were like, wow, this is fucking amazing, man. We're going to Scotland. We're going to film this castle. Monty Python recorded, filmed. We didn't think about how much we were paying, of course, because, you're young and dumb. And that's what record companies like, when you just take their money and spend it. Nowadays, if I got that kind of money, I'd go buy my own video camera and make my own video, hire my own crew. But back then, they were the gatekeepers. You had to play by their rules. Like, they loved our demo tapes, but they insisted that we go re-record. And why can't we just, spice up the demos a little bit and put them out? Oh, no. You have to use this producer and this studio, and you have to go into debt for, hundreds of thousands of dollars to us. And yeah, back then we were just like, yeah, where are we going? Great. Tour bus? Great. We got on our first tour. We didn't take a van and go out, most baby bands did. We just got right out there and played arenas and got in a tour bus and spent a whole shitload of money,
So hang on, did you actually come to Scotland to film that video?
Yes, we filmed it in Edinburgh.
I was waiting for you to say that they pulled it at the last minute. But...
No. Have you seen the video?
Yeah.
That's Doune Castle. The most haunted castle in Scotland. Yeah. Well, at least that's what they told us. Yeah. So, they had these Belgian wolfhound dogs there that looked like wolves but weren't wolves. And
how long was you over here for?
I think we were there for a weekend or something. Not long. It was our first. It wasn't my first. I had been to Ireland before, but we went to Scotland, and then we ended up going to London for a couple of days afterwards and hanging out with the Choir Boys, because we'd known the Choir Boys, so we recorded our albums in the same studio together. Yeah, that was the trip.
Very cool. Oh, man.
You're young and they tell you this is what you got to do. And we did it,
Company Wolves would be one of many bands to kind of fall out of favor in a changing music industry.
Oh, God. Well, yeah, that's what happened to us. We didn't have a president at the label when the record came out. So, everybody did the best they could. We had a radio promotion team that was really good, marketing team that was decent, video department, not so good. They had brilliant idea to pull our video from MTV to save the strength for the second video, which then MTV hated. And then they couldn't get our first video back on again. So we got screwed at MTV. But when the label finally did get a president after we made the second record, the new president came in and he was like a completely different kind of guy. Didn't like rock and roll. He was all about Vanessa Williams and Tony, these kind of urban, sort of smooth, slick sounding R&B bands. And any band that was a rock and roll band that wasn't multi-platinum or at least gold, they had Bon Jovi, they had Scorpions, they had Kiss, they had whoever else, all those kind of names. Cougar, they had Mellencamp, all these big selling names, Cinderella.
Which is crazy, because you could think we've got these bands on this label, let's just put them all out on the same tour and get this opening band their exposure.
Yeah, you would think, because we had the same manager as Cinderella and Kiss, but we never got any of those tours. The manager used to tell us, you guys would die if you went out with Kiss. They'd eat you alive, the Kiss fans. They'd hate you. Well, okay. How about Cinderella? But we never went. We ended up, we toured arenas with, are you ready for this? Richard Marx.
I have to confess, I'm a massive Richard Marx fan. I think he's awesome. But
oh, yeah, okay. Well, I'm not saying that, he's a pop guy, but, what he did was good for what he did, but it was completely the wrong tour for us. But we're like, okay, we're going to be able to get out in arenas, in a tour bus, and that was our first gig. We had done clubs and stuff before, but, we went right out into arenas. And then after that, it was all downhill from there. We went back to clubs with bands like Salty Dog. And it was a weird time because that second record came out and the new president said, any band that's not at least gold were going to be dropped. And right then, Nirvana happened. And nobody wanted to know about any band from New York. It was like, Seattle, Seattle, we're all going to Seattle. Every band has to have flannels. They have to have long shorts. They have to have Doc Martens. They have to have beards. They have to have a heroin habit. They have to write grungy, depressing music. I mean, I liked some of the grunge stuff. I loved Soundgarden and Mother Love Bone. That was my favorite of all those bands, Mother Love Bone. Stone Temple Pilots I like. But, it's because of Seattle that we weren't able to get signed again because nobody wanted to know about a band from New York playing fun, good time rock and roll music. All of a sudden, everything had to be really heavy and detuned.
Your story was only just starting then, because, from after then, you'd work with Billy Squier. We mentioned Paul Simon earlier. And then you'd land the slot with New York Dolls in 2004 when they reunited. But that's another gig where you didn't even have to audition for. You were recommended, had lunch with David Johansen, and he just offered you the gig, right?
Yeah. It was after Company of Wolves. My brother and I, we tried to get re-signed as Company of Wolves. We already had a massive bill. We had made the record and gotten a publishing deal. So if another label was gonna take our record, they were gonna have to buy it from Polygram, and nobody wanted to pay that kind of money, especially because we weren't from Seattle. So we eventually broke up, and me and my brother started our own band, Crown Jewels, and we played around New York for years, putting out our own records and, almost getting signed a few times. We had an investor and some touring around America, and it was a lot of fucking work. We didn't have a manager, and we just said, you know what? I need to make some money. My brother said, yeah, I need to make some money too. So he's like, let's take a break. So he went and played with Roseanne Cash. I went and played with Squire. I got the call from Paul Simon, and I did Willie DeVille, and then Willie called me for his next tour. I toured with him in 2003, and he called me the next summer to go out with him again. And Johansson had already called, and I was already been offered the Dolls. So that was the end of my time with Willie, and I started my 6-year tenure with the Dolls. There was no audition. I just, like I was saying about reputation and people passing your name around. David didn't remember coming. He had seen my blues or sat in with my blues band before, but he knew that I played with Willie, and he knew that he'd actually read up on me. And he goes, I know you went to school. I know you went to Rutgers. I know you're a good musician, So I'm like, oh, okay, here's a guy who actually, doesn't mind that I know what I'm doing. He had been playing with a lot of guys in his solo bands, and Buster and all that. These were like trained guys, like David likes good musicians.
But I think that's the thing, though, with like a lot of bands these days, it is on recommendation because, yes, they know you're going to be able to play, but they also need you to, are you going to be a good hang? Are you going to be professional? Are you going to be on time? It's all those other things. So the recommendation from somebody else is as important as whether someone can play.
That's the other thing. I was no Johnny Thunders. You know what I mean? In many ways, of course, I was not the kind of player that he was because, my favorite players were Chuck Berry and Keith Richards. Those were my go-to, it was my reference points because I was not a Johnny Thunders fan growing up, never listened to him. And when I heard him, I wasn't particularly impressed, but, I knew I had to do good in this position in the band. And, I knew it was a massive, that he had a lot of fans that were going to be looking at me and going, who's this guy?
But hadn't somebody compared you to Johnny Thunders when you were 15 years old?
Oh yeah, you've done your homework, haven't you? The original Dolls drummer, Billy Murcia, he died before the band recorded even, and Jerry Nolan came in. His brother moved to my town in New Jersey. I would see this guy walking down the highway by himself with like big, long, curly hair and like gigantic bell bottoms and platform shoes. And he'd be like talking to himself and like laughing to himself. I'm like, who's this fucking nut? Like an acid casualty, Turned out I think he did too many drugs, but he was a really sweet guy. His name is Alphonse Murcia. And he would go, hey, man, you know who you look like? You look like Johnny Thunders. Who's that? And he brought all the albums to my house, and that's the first time I heard the Dolls. Well, no, I'd seen the Dolls on like Don Kirshner's rock concert or something that was on late night TV, when I was a kid. But he brought, Heartbreakers and Criminals and Sylvain's solo bands. And he would always talk about Syl. And, I was a kid. I was 15, 16. And 15 years later, I'd be getting a call from Johansson. Who knew?
You've got all these like full circle moments like Chuck Berry and New York Dolls. And
Yeah.
you'll lie in bed thinking like 10 years ago, oh crap, remember when I ran into such and such? Maybe that's going to come back and get me in another 5 years.
There's still some things I haven't done that I would like to do.
Since 2010, you've been working with Michael Monroe. How is it being like transatlantic between Finland and New York? Do you like the different cultures?
I miss my family, I love being able to play in a band where I'm part of the band. I could be playing with whoever massive star where I'd be, in the background and not writing any of the songs, and probably not playing on the records, probably just going out and playing the gigs, and might be fun, but I like being involved in making the records and, writing the songs, singing and playing on them. And so it's been great.
And it is a band that's still at the top of its game. The material always gets great reviews and still sounds great. The band looks great, still puts on great shows.
Michael is a force of nature, man. He's the craziest frontman I've ever played with, for sure.
Bringing things right up to date with your new album, Bronx Cheer. How did you approach this album? Because I think there's some older songs on there as well. And I think you said you wanted to capture the spirit of New York past and present.
Yeah, that's kind of how I roll with albums. I think in my whole album making career of my own, really only written an album start to finish for one album. And that was the album Linoleum I had with my band Crown Jewels, where I was just like, all right, it's time to write an album. I remember going upstate to Woodstock. I grabbed a guitar, a boombox, a handful of I have cassette tapes piled up to the ceiling, back in the day. And this was in the 90s. Now I do everything on my phone. All my lyrics are in my phone, my memos, voice memos, where all my melodies reside. But back then I had cassette tapes and I had notebooks. I just grabbed whatever first four notebooks and a handful of cassette tapes, a boombox, a guitar, and went up to Woodstock. And I said, I'm going to write an album. And I grabbed the random cassette, put it on till I found something that turned me on. And then I flipped through my lyric books looking for a lyric that might fit with that melody. That album was written like that. But for most of my other albums, I'll have a handful of new songs. Like in this case, I think there were 3 or 4 recent songs that I've written. Wildwood Moon, Dog Days of Summer, Sexy Lies.
I was just going to reel off the songs I liked, and I've got here Wildwood Moon, Dog Days of Summer, those Sexy Lies, which is like pure Aerosmith, and I had Guilty on there as well.
All right, well, Guilty's an old one, but good to know that you like the songs I'm writing nowadays, and not just the old ones. Yeah, Guilty was from 1994. Flying was from 1994. Liar Like You is a hook that I sang when I was 15 years old. Human Animal, the opening track, is from 2008. Recovery Doll is from 2004. I presented that to New York Dolls. They didn't go for it. I presented it to Michael. He didn't go for it.
I'll take it then. I'll take it back for me.
Yeah, one man's junk is another man's treasure, I mean, sometimes people go, oh, Steve's saving all the good songs for himself. No, I played them for you and you turned them down, okay? Now you like them, now that they're done. I always knew there was something about it, but, somebody has to have some vision,
Gimme Gimme Rockaway is an older recording though, right? With Clem on drums.
Well, Gimme Gimme Rockaway was a new song back in 2015. I think I wrote that around the time we were making One Man Gang, I guess. We were writing for One Man Gang, me and Rich. Remember, I wrote that in Berlin. Yeah, that was one where I seriously said, you know what? I'm saving this for me. I could present it to Michael, but it's so New York that I need a song like this. And then, of course, little Steven heard it and was like, I want that to be a single for my label back in 2017. So that's old as far as being out before in 2017. And Steven said, yeah, you got to put that on the album. I was like, really? Come on, that's already been out. He's like, no, you got to put it on. I was like, okay.
Does Stevie Van Zandt have much input on the material when it's coming together, or does he just let you get on with it? I know he can be pretty hands-on.
He could be. You see, I'd done Rockaway in 2017, and then I went and I did the Michael thing, and we made One Man Gang, and then guy from the label, Steven's label, called me up and he said, let's do another single. And I said, okay. I said, I'll send you some songs. Remember, Steven was out on the road with his band, the Disciples of Soul. They had done a studio album and a live album, and he was really busy. And I kept sending all these songs, and I couldn't get him to focus and pay attention. And, he's a busy guy. He's got the radio station. He's got the label. He's got his own band. He's massively talented and hardworking guy. I eventually said, you know what? I got to go do this. I'm just going to go make my own record. I'll see if you guys are interested when I'm done with it. I said, I got to make an album. I can't wait around for a single. So I went and I made the album. Then I got back in touch with the label. I said, I'm going to have my lawyer go, talk to a couple labels now. And I said, but do you guys want to hear it first? And he said, sure. So I sent him the record and he's like, all right, Steven loves it, but you got to talk to him. So I got on the phone with him and he's like, all right, you got to change this and you got to switch the order of the songs. And I'm like, whoa. I said, I just spent like the past year of my life, like arranging this and like working on the cover and the title and the sequence. And do me a favor, just listen to it once in my order. And if you hate it, then, we'll talk. And he listened to it and he said, no, it's fine.
He wanted that little micromanaging kind of thing on it.
Yeah, but I don't blame him. It's his label, It's his reputation, it's his radio station, it's his, so he totally has the right to do that. And and I, to be fair, I wanted him to be involved. I would have wanted him to produce it with me, but he was busy. I mean, I couldn't even get him to listen to the songs before I recorded them. But luckily, he liked all the songs. And I will say the 4 songs that he picked for singles are not the 4 that I would have picked. But like when you're with a record company, you can't fight too much.
No, it's got to be give and take.
Yeah, I mean, you can go, no, I demand that you push this song. And if they hate it, they're not going to have their heart in it, So, I said, fine, pick the singles. So he picked, he just named the 4 songs that had to be Recovery Doll. It had to be Dog Days. I was happy about those 2. It had to be Overnight Smashers and Those Sexy Lies.
Any plans to perform it live?
Yeah, well, we did an album release party, show rather, and Steven came out, he and his wife, and some label people came out, and from the radio station, and it was a great show. It was in New York 2 weeks ago, and Steven, he was waiting upstairs for me. I didn't even realize he was still there. I heard that he was there. I didn't see him. After the show, I went straight out to the merch booth, which I do. I want to make sure that if people want stuff signed, I'm there. And so I was hanging out down at the merch booth for like an hour.
Stevie Van Zandt sat in your dressing room on his own.
Yeah, I just figured, all right, well, if Steven was here, then he's probably gone already, And then somebody sends me a note, Steven's waiting for you upstairs. I'm like, oh, shit. So I ran upstairs and we talked for a while. It was great. And, he loved the show and had some suggestions. He's like, I want to, help you, arrange a new show. And I'm like, great, man, Bring it on.
That's great that he's still that passionate about the music.
He's a great producer and, producer of all things, of music, of albums, of shows. He's produced The Rascals, who made a comeback and they went on Broadway. His wife is very involved. They have a production company. They do films. They were in The Sopranos together.
Guy's unstoppable.
Yeah. So I'm very happy to be involved with, I feel very fortunate and kind of like it was meant to happen. I grew up with his cousins in New Jersey. We know many of the same people.
Another full circle thing.
Yeah, it really is. Me and Bruce Springsteen are born on the same day.
Sweet, man. Steve, I've kept you way too long. Just kind of in closing, when you come back from Finland, when you've been away for a while, do you have a place to go in New York City to recalibrate with the city, or is it just back to family life?
No, I go straight back. I mean, I have a studio in my apartment. We have a 3-bedroom apartment. My wife and I have 1 bedroom. The kids have theirs. And then I have my man cave where I have all my guitars and I have my recording gear. And then it's an apartment, so I can't make big noise in there. But then in Manhattan, I have a space where I have all my Marshall amps and Vox amps and I can crank it up and I have drums and, I can record loud stuff there. So, if I need to go rock out, that's where I can go.
No dive bar or restaurant where I'm missing that specific meal.
No, because of COVID, I'm not in that groove. I'm not in that mode where I can't wait to get back and go to, this place because I haven't been to this place in 2 years now, So when I get back, hopefully things will be opening up. So I'll be hitting some of the night spots again, hopefully.
Sweet, man. Well, Steve, thanks ever so much for chatting with us. I hope I hadn't took up too much of your time, but I've loved hearing the stories.
Not at all, man. I appreciate it. And you asked me some different questions, which was very refreshing. Thank you.
Try my best.
All right, Rob. Thank you so much for chatting.
Steve Conte, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed that, and thanks so much to Steve for taking the time to talk to me from Finland, where he's currently recording the new Michael Monroe album. The new Steve Conte album, Bronx Cheer, is out now on Little Steven's wicked cool record label, and it's a great rock and roll album with a ton of swagger and some great tunes, so please check that out. Everything Steve Conte can be found over at stevecontenyc.com, and he's on all the social media platforms, so why not reach out to him and let him know you heard him on this show. For all things straight to video, it can be found at stvpod.com, and we have the Patreon page for all added goodness over at patreon.com/stvpod. And thank you so much to everyone who continues to support that. Alright, that's another rocking episode in the bag with lots more fun stuff on the way. So thanks for continuing to listen, and I look forward to doing it all again soon.